Ross made a comment about Mr. Sugi and Swissindo on Ron Van Dyke's Facebook page. Mm-hmm. And I responded by saying, I don't want no shit stinking hierarchical king. You know, I kind of went off a little bit. And so Ross and I started an argument between us on Ron Van Dyke's page. And then one day, and we were sort of to and froing for a few days on Ron Van Dyke's page. And one day Ross just said, listen, why are we polluting Ron's page with our little, discussion? Why don't you just friend me and we'll talk directly? And I thought, that's for somebody that I've just had a real sort of red hot go at. That's pretty decent, Something was in Ross that is so goddamn decent, Can't praise that guy enough, really. Mm-hmm. I mean, we were all misguided, okay? So, I said, yeah, sure, friend me. And then he started talking about what he had seen and, started asking me if these funds were being released, would you rather have some influence and sway in how it's going to be done, or would you rather just leave it to God knows who? Would you be interested in reconsidering and hearing more about Sugi and Sugi's story? And, would you be willing to join the delegation because you know about the OPPT, you're obviously an intelligent person, blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, and then, in the back of my mind, I kind of went, well, maybe that's the meaning of my awakening, is that I get to do this, right? It's funny how you string it all together, right? Because you want to see something. But anyway, so I said, okay, I'll join. I'll keep an open mind. I'll join. I don't like hierarchy and kings and stuff. So then I joined. And when I joined, I was given documents. And I was given documents by OMD, the Organisation Mondiale Développement, about how they had worked and had been funded as an NGO, charity, Third World Charity NGO, how they had been working and funded by Swissindo for over 50 years. And that gave the claim some legitimacy. Mm-hmm. And Sino also claims to be the owner or the head of the UN, because he owns all the money and he owns everything, and he's, the families, the royal families have set up the UN as part of their plan, mm-hmm. and the whole spiel was that the cabal had sort of usurped what the royals had set up, the dragon families, etc., had set up in terms of the UN and used it for their own means, and also the monetary system by means of the Fed had sort of inserted themselves into the royals' plan as a tapeworm and had usurped everything. So these were the sons turning against the father, so to speak, and Sino was the father, and the sons had revolted against him, and he wanted to set things straight. And that kind of sounded, since OMD was kind of there, and there's a long, an organisation that I could check and verify was active with the UN, etc., and they were giving a lot of legitimacy. So it kind of, my concerns were kind of somewhat alleviated. And then Desmond and Paula came on the scene, and it was, the concept of the servant king. Kings in Asia and in Java, which is where Cirebon is, where Sino's from, they have generally a very different description of king, and the king is the ultimate servant. He's not the owner of everything. He's not the ultimate ruler of authority. He is the ultimate servant. The ultimate wise servant of everyone is the king. They have a different concept of royalty, and this is what he is, and this is what he's professing to be. He's a servant king. The Paul coined the term servant king. And so we kind of, I was looking for this meaning, and there was this legitimacy from this OMD, and then there was this servant king thing, so I kind of went, okay, maybe that's the way it goes. This is the agency by which change comes, and, we were sort of told that once the money will flow, then, people will become independent, he will step back, and he's not a ruling despot, sole authority king, like a Western king was.
Can you say a little bit more about the financial side of this?
Yeah. Okay. So with these documents was the first recruitment document I got was, are you willing to take a risk of, to help humanity? You may get, rolled by the cabal. You may get arrested. You may be in peril. Have you got any skeletons in your closet? Are you clean? You may get attacked. Are you willing to sacrifice about a year of your time, which is all it's going to take to do this undertaking? And if so, blah, 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 give us a little resume, copy of your resume, and for your efforts of this year, you will be paid $1.2 million US dollars. That was the first recruitment document that I was given. So there was $1.2 million.
That's a lot of money, and how were you meant to receive that money? At the end, along the way, some at the beginning?
Well, as soon as the monies were released and the money was beginning to flow to the people, we were going to get this remuneration. So we were going to get it after the money was released.
So this I think is a concept that you and I are familiar with, but people who are listening to this for the first time may not quite understand what this release of money involves.
That's where I was getting to. So okay. I was getting to where you're steering me, so bear with me. And I know, I'm long-winded. I'm just that kind of a guy. And this is a big story. This is 18 months of 20 to 24 hours a day of my life that I'm talking about. That's how involved I got. Once I'm in, I'm in. So, okay, where does the money come from? Another document I was given when I was recruited was the Asian history of banking by one Ernest Rauthschild with AU, not OTH. And this document outlined how the royals of the world had made this plan from year dot. Basically, the wealth was based on King Solomon's wealth, King Solomon's gold. Partly the Templars had gotten, the holy wars in Israel in the Middle Ages were fought, Dark Ages, I suppose, were fought over the gold, weren't fought over religion, they were fought over King Solomon's gold stash. And the Knights Templars had partially gotten hold of King Solomon's gold stash, and King Solomon's wife, who was from Indonesia, took the rest of it with her in ships, and that was the basis of that royal bloodline in Indonesia and of their wealth. And so this has accumulated for thousands of years, this wealth that they made from being involved in the spice trade and, all the trade routes in Asia and into the Middle East. And, they'd amassed these enormous fortunes. And all these indigenous royals basically had amassed these enormous fortunes, which were stashed away in caves, basically, stash spots.
Actually, I have spoken to some very senior people in gold, various gold research organizations about this, and they remind me that most of the trade at that time was settled in silver rather than gold.
Yeah, actually. Well, it wasn't just gold; it was silver as well. But I think the figure was something like 72 million metric tons of gold or something like that, and that just doesn't add up either.
No,
that's a lot. That's a lot of cave full. Well, even with
the official amount of gold in the world is 175,000 metric tons, something like that. Yeah. So less than 200,000 metric tons.
Yeah. Okay. So, at that stage, anyway, the value of all of this. So what we were told was that UBS in Switzerland, which you obviously know as a financial institution, UBS in Switzerland had been given access to these gold caches and had certified them. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm still on the Asian history of banking. So all these royal families have decided that in order to stop squabbling amongst themselves over who's going to own what, they're all going to enter into a little breeding program and breed all these little Illuminatis until at the very top of the pyramid you have M1, Monetary One, Mr. M1. And so he's supposed to be the crossbreed of all the Illuminati families over thousands of years to get to this point. And the idea was then to start World War II and dethrone all the colonial powers by means of World War II. And then once that had happened, they could actually, through the means of the United Nations, set up a single main government for the world and redistribute the wealth back to the people and set up a fair society. And the cabal had entered into this plan with the Federal Reserve and their clever little, 1928 crash, and the cabal had sort of put itself in as a, tapeworm into the good system. So this is basically what the explanation was. Mm-hmm. And so this was, M1 was Sukarno. And just to briefly go into Indonesian history, Sukarno was the Indonesian folk hero who tossed the Dutch out of Indonesia. And
so being Dutch, you would know about that from your, history readings growing up in Holland.
Yeah. Well, my uncle was in the what the Dutch called the police actions in Indonesia, which were really just colonist uprising suppression by the Dutch military. So my uncle actually served in Indonesia, so I have first-hand stories of that. And so when I was a kid in school in Holland, Sukarno was very much vilified because he was by the Western, powers that were very much vilified because he broke the colonial back of the Dutch, and they were terrified because they were all struggling to hang on to their colonies, and so Sukarno was the M1, and he's a very mythical figure in Indonesia because he brought them their freedom and their sense of national pride and their sense of the oppressed little Asian fella overcoming the horrible white military suppression machine and regimes. And Sukarno was a hero. He organized them and he stood up against the Dutch and he kicked the Dutch out, and unfortunately he was derailed by Suharto. In primary school, I remember in 3rd or 4th grade in primary school in Holland that we were taught history, and we were taught that Suharto was the nice guy because he had heart, and Sukarno was the bad guy, and they both sounded a lot alike. But you could remember this by knowing that Suharto had the word heart in his name, and that meant he had a good heart. He was the good guy, and he was, of course, the people that the one that the West put in to get rid of Sukarno. So Sukarno was exiled, and then later, died or was murdered. Who knows? And so this was the end of. This is how the cabal had. And the Western powers had stopped the eldest plan by getting rid of M1. Mm-hmm. Okay, so meanwhile, I'll just hop back to where I was recruited. So I was given all these documents about M1, Sukarno, all this sort of stuff, OPPT. And so we got together, and meanwhile the South African delegation had set up an encrypted voice server on a gaming platform, a TeamSpeak platform, which is a platform that gamers use to, tell each other, the enemy's coming over the hill at the left there, online gamers. Mm-hmm. And it's encrypted, and they thought it'd be very safe. Nobody'd be looking for these people plotting to overthrow the powers that be on this gaming server that's encrypted anyway, so let's make a platform here. So they set up this platform. We started having meetings. We all had our own rooms, African room, American room, and Australian room. The Asians we never met. OMD were not in the picture at that stage. They weren't talking to us. Mm-hmm. OMD were very much opposed to the idea of setting up delegations, by the way. It was what I'm told. So we're in this service chat rooms. We are helping each other out to build up the delegations into, 20 members each plus an executive of 3 on top of that. At first there was no real structure to it. We had Ross, who was the delegation head, so to speak. He didn't have any title or anything like that bestowed upon him by the magnificent Sino. And we had...
Peter, can I just interrupt for a brief second here? What sort of involvement, if any, did Sino have in the operation of the rooms at that stage? Because, his English isn't very good. So he can hardly be a regular participant.
He was not. He was not in the picture.
Okay.
and his English can be surprisingly good if he wants it to be. As I was very surprised. Now, I'll get to that. Okay, so we've got these delegations. We're talking on these platforms. OMD is not talking to us. We don't know who the heck MUN is, the Asian delegation. We've just got these 3 continental delegations sitting on this server, twiddling their thumbs, talking small talk, and then the man who is Mr. Sino's chief of military, and I'll just call him Daryl by his first name, who was an OPPT guy that featured on the radio shows, and he'd done courtesy notices. He had his house repossessed, he had his business repossessed, his assets repossessed, because, under the courtesy notices, because the corporations were foreclosed, they were not allowed to get any payments from you. You didn't have to pay any debts back because all the debts were foreclosed. There was nobody to have a debt to. All the entities were foreclosed, and so a lot of people lost their houses and stuff with the OPPT, and amassed fines and unpaid bills. And a lot of these OPPT people still have lots of legal troubles and stuff now because they hadn't paid bills for a year, or hadn't paid fines or license fees, all sorts of stuff, because everything was foreclosed and they didn't have to pay anyone anything.
That's the kind of dark shadow of the OPP, is it?
Yeah, that's the dark shadow, and I never believed in that side of it, because I was looking at the spiritual side, and I'm thinking these guys are not interpreting what Heather is saying in the right way. Mm-hmm. But that's regressing again, and I'm going forward. So what happened was that Daryl had sort of met up with Desmond and Paula, and they were working together to get these delegations. Daryl was an ex-Canadian military captain, and Sino talked to him and he said, I'm going to make you head of the military, worldwide of the military when it comes under my control. I have all the NATO, CATO codes, I have all the account numbers, I will have control over the money soon, and when I control the money, I will control the military. You will be the lieutenant general of, the head honcho. That's it. And so he was a big wig, and all us OPPT people knew him from the radio shows, so we kind of idolized him a bit. He was pretty large in our eyes,
Sorry, who are we talking about exactly right now?
Daryl Zeleny.
Daryl Zeleny, sorry. Okay,
I'm trying to avoid sort of naming too many people, but
the name will have been known to anyone who was following.
Yeah. Look, I've got to identify the players to some extent, otherwise it's just, you won't be able to follow what's going on. So we're sitting on this platform and nothing much is happening, and Ross is giving us little bits of information because he's been talking to the Indonesians for over a year by that stage already, right? He's a year ahead of everyone. And he's giving us bits and pieces about Sino and about the accounts, and bits and pieces that he's being fed from the Indonesians, basically. And the communications, again, are very, very difficult because nobody really speaks English, etc., etc., etc. So there's scant little bits of information, and there's always this tiny little tidbit of information to keep your curiosity piqued, And all of a sudden, here comes DZ, Daryl Zeleny, I'll call him DZ from now. Here comes DZ onto the scene, and here's this OPPT hero who's gonna be the main military man in the world, and he's gonna set things straight, and working with Sino and the collateral accounts. And here he comes on the scene, and he starts organising us to. So once we, have control of the military, basically we're going to stage a worldwide coup with the backing of all this financing from this gold. We're going to stage a worldwide coup, and what we're going to do is make governments accountable and make governments transparent, and we're going to adopt the system that Heather designed in her filings as the new system to replace the corporate system, which is the CVACS system, CVACS, Creators Value Asset Center. Centers.
Peter, this is good. I can see some contradictions at this point. I won't go into, but just to mention one is, and I think we should probably explore what this means. Having the funds released. because you and I spoke this morning about these bonds. I think it's important to get that on the table and better understand. But before it seems curious that people are waiting for people who have funds to pay those funds, and yet those are exactly the same people who are going to be the victims of a military coup. So why should they turn over the gold to allow themselves to be replaced?
That's correct. So the whole idea was that this system had been set up by the elders. There was M1. M1 was deposed of, and Sugi, as the legend goes, or Sino, as the legend goes, was an unassuming architectural student in Indonesia, and when he came to Cirebon, all of a sudden, the codes, and he came into possession of a microfilm with the codes that was held by Sukarno, and other codes, etc., account numbers, passwords, account codes, Federal Reserve codes, all that. It just appeared in his head, right? And it was given to him by God to be the next M1.
So that's the claim he's making. Sino.
Yes. And so Sino, because they had thought they had deposed of M1, Sino was actually M1. And he was the signatory who, with his signature, could release the monies. He was the rightful owner of everything, and they would have to comply with his wishes.
Okay, well, I think there's a very important piece that's sort of you haven't mentioned in this conversation, but you did this morning. And if I can just go there for a second for people who might be a bit confused. What we believe to be true, and by we I mean loads of people believe this, including Joseph Farrell, who's a well-known researcher, that somebody issued some bonds in the 30s, and those bonds had stamped on them the name of the Federal Reserve. And they may or may not be authentic bonds, but possibly some of them were authentic and some of them might have been forgeries. But these bonds were supposedly used by a group purporting to be the U.S. government to exchange these bonds for gold in Asia. And these exchanges were supposedly done in China and throughout Southeast Asia. And the U.S. people, at least purporting to be the U.S. government, walked away with a bunch of gold and handed bits of paper which were supposedly gold-linked bonds. That's the piece I wanted to get out there on the table.
That is absolutely correct. But at the point in my story where I am, I wasn't aware of those yet. Okay. What I was aware of what the story went is they had all these gold caches. UBS had verified the gold caches and the amounts. And some of the Swissindo people had all these videos of these caves with, and there is a lot of footage of a lot of gold, Anyway, I'll put that aside for a moment.
Yeah, I think you'll come on.
Purporting to be gold, exactly right. So UBS had certified this gold. So, you couldn't, carry millions of tons of gold, in your pocket. So UBS had certified this, and based upon this certification, UBS was going to release fiat money via banks, or gold-backed money, but anyway, via banks, into the system, into accounts that would be controlled by Swissindo, and each country would be paid out, would have an amount in an account amounting to 138 trillion US dollars, would be allocated, plus there was enough to allocate a trust of $6 million for each person alive on this planet.
Let me just slow you down there so we can, because I'm very interested in these numbers, because I've studied them quite a bit. So the number you just mentioned, I think, was 136 trillion. Is that right?
138 trillion.
All right.
Well, it's 128. It varied. I think it went from 138 to 128. I think they lost some numbers here and there and then made them back up.
So before we talk about what that is, I'd just like to put that into context for the listener. The research I've done on tangible net worth, and here I'm basically zeroing out all the debts IOUs and so forth, and financial assets, and just looking at tangible assets in the entire planet are probably something in the region, well, somewhere between 200 and 300 trillion dollars on the planet. So you're talking about half the wealth of the tangible wealth of the world represented by what was this again? What was this number purported to be? It was 128 or 138 million. So what was it represented by? Was it represented by these bonds?
No, it wasn't represented by these bonds. These bonds were not in the picture as yet. They came into the picture later on. Okay. This was gold caches verified and inspected by UBS representatives. That's why it's Swissindo, because UBS is the United Bank of Switzerland. Right?
Yeah, well, I used to work for Swiss Bank, so I actually know. Yeah. I've been to Basel. Yeah. The banks don't do that. I mean, they would just never do that because I worked at a high enough level in the bank that I would be able to say that with some confidence.
Fair enough.
Never mind.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I didn't know that because I'd never had anything to do with the bank. Overdraw my account.
Yeah, but I mean, there are people around who were always trying to get a hold of letterheads of banks, and they were sending letters and asking for the bank to confirm this or that. I think they just wanted to see what language and what letterhead the banks would use, and then they might actually forge something that looked like that. So that's probably what was going on here, in my opinion.
Yeah. So, so the story was UBS had certified it. They were going to release it through banks into accounts under Swissindo control, and the delegates would be overseeing the release of these funds. There would be a stipend paid out of the $6 million in trust for everyone. They weren't going to give everybody $6 million. Mm-hmm. They were going to pay $600 US. This is a US value, $600 US a month to non-working people, and $1,200 US a month as a stipend to working people. So like a guarantee.
As far as these numbers were sort of made up by Sino or someone in his organization?
Yes, they came down from Indonesia. These were the numbers, these were the parameters we had to work with. Mm-hmm. And Daryl Zeleny got us to design CVOT systems and, work with the OPPT filing. So we were sort of looking at all aspects of societal life. There's finance, there's environment, there's, energy, basically what a government does, and look at all these departments of human endeavour and governmental endeavour and rewrite those governmental endeavours into CVACs. And we spend months and months and months and months and months working away in groups on CVACs, and, things would always change from Indonesia, so there was always more work thrown at you. They kept you kind of busy, And
so because of the time here, I'm going to have to ask you to, sort of speed through this a little bit. Maybe I can just jump ahead here. You told me earlier today two really interesting stories, and maybe you could tell those again now, fit them in at least. One of them was about what you saw, which, gave you some confidence that there was some real reality to the story. Yeah. And the second thing is about what happened in Indonesia.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I'll go there. So long story short, I'll put it all in a nutshell. We had these delegations. We worked on CVACs. All of a sudden, CVACs became irrelevant. The timeline went basically, I started in March 2013. By June, we were supposed to be in Indonesia to attend the Super Sema conference and sign the new agreement that was going to supersede the 1944 Hilton, Green Hilton agreement. And that was going to put the plan of Sukarno back on track. When we signed that, after that there would be a spiritual ceremony which would elevate us all and give us DNA upgrades and, put our base frequencies from so many hertz to so many megahertz, and we'd all be, enlightened. And after that would be the coronation of Mr. Sugi, and once as King of Kings, and once these three things were done, then Puff the magic dragon would appear out of the sky and it would rain money on everyone.